Hello, my friends, and welcome to a very important episode of Machine Shop Mastery. Today, I got to sit down with Mark Heston, who you might recall, if you're a frequent listener, from episode 51 about a year and a half ago or so. And Mark shared at that point about the business that he had bought with some partners and some investors, an aerospace shop that specialized in landing gear components in New Jersey. And he shared about the things they had to do when they bought the business to kind of fix some things and improve the culture and fix pricing and a bunch of things. Well, today we are back with a really important story about the transition that Mark had to make, the difficult decision to go into bankruptcy and sell off that business in bankruptcy. Mark was incredibly gracious to sit down and talk about the hard side of this business. We always talk about it being the hardest business in the world, and it's not always roses. And this is a prime example of actually a very strong business that was in a great market with lots of demand, but they just could not keep it together, mostly on the cash flow side, to make this business viable and had to liquidate it. So we get into all really important topics, from the importance of capitalization and liquidity and being really focused on the numbers, of course, focused on cash flow, supply chain partnerships, bringing in advisors to help you if you're buying a business or selling your business. And so this is just a really sort of raw, candid conversation that I think needs to be had more often. Please let me know in the feedback on LinkedIn is the best place, what you think about this episode, if you want to hear more like it, and just your feedback in general. So thanks for listening, and let's go ahead and get into the show. Mark, welcome to the show. Again, it's good to have you back.
Thanks for having me back, Paul. Appreciate it.
So to catch people up, you were on episode 51, which came out on April 10th, 2024. And you told a bit of the story of buying a shop with some partners of yours, sort of the turnaround, having to, rebuild culture and rebuild processes and have difficult conversations with customers about way underpriced work. And so I would encourage people to go back and check that episode out. But that whole story took an interesting twist, and you're here to tell the story of what happened. And I guess as we kind of talked about before we hit record here, maybe frame it in the conversation of, if you're going to buy a shop, here's some things to really look for. If you're going to sell your shop, here's some things you really need to have in place to be able to maximize the value and actually have it be able to sell. And then as you're running a shop, here are things that you want to do and be aware of and pay attention to. So,
exactly.
So, yes, thank you for coming back. Thank you for telling the story we're about to get into.
All right. Just kind of a quick recap, just to catch listeners up maybe from kind of episode 51, save you a few minutes to have to listen to the whole thing. March of 2022, we purchased a AS 9100 landing gear build-to-print machine shop in North Jersey, doing about $7-8 million of top-line revenue. So like I said, we bought it with...
Did you say 70?
7-8 million, 7 or 8, not 70.
7 or 8. Okay.
7 or 8. Yeah, sub 10.
Yeah.
Sub 10.
That's what I recalled.
No, not 70. Okay. So sub $10 million revenue, pretty complex stuff, a lot of mill turn, hard metals, tip of the spear from a complexity standpoint. So when you walk through the facility, machines, assets, it was a big Mori site, DMG Mori. So lots of, NTXs and LXs and, DMG, MV3000 mill or 5-axis mills. So really good asset base. But one of the things that we, walked in the business, we realized pretty quickly that our top two customers were exiting the business. Like you mentioned, we had some pricing constraints that I walked through there with customers. So we were having some difficult conversations with customers about repricing and terms and contracts. And so when we had that conversation, we were just going to the other side of that on our podcast and really kind of getting into the aftermath of the first kind of 18 months of understanding what we bought from a business perspective.
Yeah.
So kind of jumping forward a little bit. So we got the business, we got our price increases, and it's just one of those where it's it's a tale that, in this industry, all we hear about are the successes and, the great marketing and influencers. And, Paul's is a great advocate for this industry and, carries the flag for it. But, I was talking to Paul and I said the one thing that I think that we don't do a good enough job of is talking about, when the things go badly. Everyone hears about the successes, the newest acquisitions, new machines getting landed at the shops. Those are all fun and exciting things. But what happens when, payroll's at risk, when, you can't make your debt covenants to the bank, when, you have investors who, won't put more capital into the business, the darker side of this industry that, I guess as most of us have lived through or deal with, but seems to be no one wants to talk about. So one of the things I was wanting to do is come on here and say, yeah, there was a lot of good things we did, but we had some challenges, and I want to talk about, why it didn't work, where we went wrong, and, do a postmortem of what would we have done differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thank you just before you get into that. Thank you very much for being willing. You're totally right about it. And I probably do too much of it myself without talking about the harder parts. We've had one other episode in the history of this podcast where we talked about a failure, and that was episode 64. We had Jeremy Rogers, who decided to close down his shop after he bought it. A very different scale than what you're dealing with, but that, I always say it's the hardest business in the world. That comes with failures, right? So it's important to talk about them and let people know if they're going through those super hard times, they're not the only ones that have, gone through that. So yeah, thank you again. And look forward to hearing more about it.
Yeah. I think kind of the when I look back, what was the main number one problem? And I think it all came back to kind of two main issues. And those stem from diligence of buying the business is one, the financials of the business, like a lot of small businesses, weren't great. But they went to the fact where there's not great, and then there's just completely, I don't say fabrication, but just, they weren't real numbers, so you were making decisions based on things that, weren't actually happening. So I think, from our standpoint, we made a lot of decisions in year one that, from capital purchases to how we allocated our resources, that we would do differently now knowing that our job costing, some of the financial metrics of the business weren't where we thought they were. We thought the business was profitable. We thought it was throwing off cash. The products we had were, market competitive from a complexity standpoint. They didn't appear to be too underpriced from what the market comparatively would command. But the business just wasn't making money. And it took really 6, 9, 12 months of cleaning up books, doing diligence, really getting our job costing in order to realize we had a problem. And at that point, realizing we had a problem a year into a business, it's too late. So, the first thing we're going to do is we should have had this either cleaned up in diligence before we bought the business, understood how the cash moved in and out of the business beforehand. Or if we didn't get to that point of actually understanding that, we should have just probably not bought the business based on the data we had in front of us. The second piece of that was, I think even with the financial data we had and the information we had, I think if we would have capitalized the business correctly from the onset, we could have weathered those storms. So what do I mean by that? So when I say capitalize the business, machine shop, as most people through this, it's all about working capital. You got to pay your processor, you got to buy raw material, you got to buy machine assets, pay your people, everything that goes into making the components. If we had a better, I would say, handle on some of those activities, I think we would have been positioned ourselves for a better kind of launching pad going forward. So those are the two kind of like the easy going back and look at things that we've done differently. So let's walk into linear of, kind of like late 2024, 2025. So when we left you last time, we had fixed pricing, we were changing the culture, we were doing, a lot of good things. And we were, profitability of the business was going up. We were, getting new customers, winning new work, getting new contracts. On paper, everything was going how you wanted to go if you were just reading it. But I think the one things that, as you're going through this, this is whether you're operating a business, and this goes back to doing your diligence on the front end, is I keep coming back to cash as oxygen in these businesses. There's profit and there's liquidity. And those aren't the same. And, as a young entrepreneur and a young business owner, that was a kind of an aha moment of like, there's your P&L of like, okay, yeah, you sell this part for $100, it costs you $70, you're making $30 for it. Or you have on the other side a part that, you're selling for $100, it costs you $90 to do for it. Every person is going to choose the 30% margin part versus the 10% margin part. What they don't realize is that 30% margin part may have, a long lead raw material. It may have, it may take you, a year to manufacture it. And then your customer may not pay you for 60, 90, or 120 days for it. So in that 30% margin part, your cash conversion cycle is, could be over a year. And flip to the other side of the coin where you have, the other part where it's $100, and you're making 10%, that could be very easy, quick turn, and you're paid for it in 30, 60 days. I think the challenge we had was we had a business that was very liquid and unprofitable, and we saw the unprofitability. But as we moved it to profitability, our cash conversion cycle started to creep out, and it got to the point where the oxygen of the business started to get sucked out. So the numbers started to look better from a profitability, gross margin, contribution margin, all the levers you're looking to pull, except for I don't say we ignored it, but we took for granted the cash conversion cycle and the lifeblood of the business, which is your oxygen, which is cash generation. So it was profitable on your P&L, but you couldn't go fast enough through the transition to really keep the business going at the velocity it need to go at that rate.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. And having walked and toured, in fact, we have a shop tour video of a business that does this exact thing in California, landing gear parts. I've seen how long the parts take to make compared to most machine shops, right? I mean, this is, long lead time forgings, things going out of house 4, 5, 6, 7 times, so different processes. All those vendors need to be paid. They're not going to wait around because you're doing other projects with them, and if you don't pay them, they're not going to run your parts. So you're stuck in this cycle of having to spend massive amounts of cash up front, and and like you said, you may not get paid by your customer for like a year or more even.
It's a tough business to really understand that flow of capital for the business. But if you're working your business today, if you're buying a business, really those understanding how the cash comes in and out of your business and where you're allocating it is everything. It's the whole. It's the whole. You can talk about customers and machine tools and machinists and all those things, but really in a business, your cash cycle is everything. And it's usually the most painful lesson to learn.
Yeah. And it's not top of mind for everybody, right?
Yeah, capital allocation. It's tough. It's hard, and but it makes or breaks your business for sure.
Yeah. So going back to the 2 points you made, let's talk about the due diligence and the numbers that may not have been as representative as what reality was. How, as a potential buyer, could you have dug in deeper or mitigated that risk and really understood better what the real situation was with the resources you had available and the information you were given?
Great question, Paul. It comes down to what is playing it out, and looking at, okay, if the absolute worst case scenarios happen, what is our downside? Or if everything, and then you go up from there. If only 80% of the bad things happen, what does that look like? And then you determine, really it's 2 things: valuation of the business, how much you're willing to pay for it based on the messiness you're looking at. And then secondly, and probably just as important, is how much working capital do you put in the business to, kind of fund through those transition period and learning the business. I think ultimately, we paid too much for the business, and we didn't capitalize it well enough to where we just didn't have enough runway to, kind of go through that transition that the business was under that we didn't really realize. If we would have, if the top two customers weren't leaving the business or on exit plans or, contracts winding down, and let's say we would have 2 years of that versus 1 year, we're probably having a lot different conversation than you have a year to figure things out. You're not to mention both these customers paid in 30 days. So they were very liquid, quick turn customers.
Wow.
So it was, we went from an unprofitable business, but it had a very liquid cash revolver with our two largest customers to a profitable business, but there was no liquidity flush into the system. And then once you kind of lose that oxygen, it grinds to a halt pretty quickly. Like you said, you can't pay vendors, you can't buy raw material. It's hard to do anything in this industry because no one does 100% anything vertically integrated. You're buying material from somebody, right. You're going to heat treated from somebody, someone's painting it. Right. It's hard to do all those things yourself. So those all need capital, and in our industry, plenty of it. And if you don't have that right size, it makes making complicated aerospace components pretty challenging most days.
So can you maybe just elaborate a little more on, these numbers? You said it looked like it was profitable from the numbers you were given, but in fact it wasn't. Maybe just a little more there on, how that was the case.
Yeah. So first thing is, when you look on the diligence side, when you're looking at a business, you really understand how are they doing their accounting? Are they doing accrual accounting? Are they doing cash? Really understanding when they're counting revenue, counting profits. That's the first piece. We were told it was accrual accounting, but they were actually doing cash accounting. So we had a misalignment there.
Oh, wow.
And you go look at the balance sheet, and the 3-year trailing balance sheet for inventory had a static number on it. So that means the balance sheet hasn't been. So there was no inventory. There was no working capital pegs in the business. There was no, it was fugazing. It was what they did to pass accounting and minimize taxes. And you got to really understand the numbers and the business where it's coming in, and don't just take them for what they look like on surface value. Dig that next layer deep, ask those tough questions, dig in to see the invoices. Okay, when did you ship this? When did they pay it? When did you buy it? Really just kind of roll your sleeves up and get dirty, and not just take it for, kind of face value of what you see there. It's the old adage, trust but verify. You want to trust the numbers, but you want to dig into them and go that next 2 layers deep to understand them and really understand how they got there. And looking at a P&L and a balance sheet's one thing, but understanding how it actually lives and breathes in the business is imperative.
So if someone is buying a shop, and let's say they're a machinist or an industry person that isn't super skilled with these numbers, I'm guessing your advice would be to hire a CPA, someone to really sort of be a partner in that process to kind of do that due diligence alongside them.
Yep, great point. Get a quality earnings done. There's tons of firms out there that do fractional CFO. Just get somebody that's a trained eye to look at these and validate what you're seeing, and have your questions and really dig into on the front end of what you're looking at. Because if you don't, you're walking into potential landmines everywhere. And it's kind of like, the easiest example is like when you're selling your house, everyone does little things to make it look better. They put some fresh paint on it. They hide this, they do that.
Right.
They make it aesthetically pleasing when you walk through it. Selling a business is the same. They're making it look as attractive as marketing as possible to sell it. So they're going to hide, the skeletons in the closet. Not intentionally or not legally or do anything illegal, but they're going to leverage what they're really good at and put that at the forefront. And you as a buyer or a new operator needs to dig past that excitement on the shop and really get into the fundamentals of the business. And the other thing too is I would say the balance sheet's probably more important than P&L, going forward. Understanding the assets they have, cash on hand, the leverage of the business. And that was the other piece that we had is, if we would have probably been okay long term, but we had too much leverage on the business. We had a note coming due in 12 months that we knew we weren't going to pay. So understanding our leverage as well. It's as Charlie Munger used to say, the 3 L's always trip you up: ladies, liquor, and leverage. So like,
yeah,
leverage is a great thing. Debt, it could be great to buy machines, buy businesses, but really understanding, the cash flow, what that debt's going to do to it, how you're going to service that, how you're going to get out from underneath that debt at some point. Another thing too is for any owners that are today running their business, if you're in these situations, like if you have an untenable situation with debt, or you're like, man, this sounds exactly like what I'm walking through. I would just say you have to take a very like Machiavellian approach to where nothing else matters until you get the cash, the balance sheet, the debt profile of your business solved. Like, you can go to all the marketing events you want, you can go recruit all the people you want, you can get all the new customers you want. But if you can't keep the business operating at a healthy, financially stable position, those things just don't matter. So if you're in this situation and you're working on other things, my suggestion is stop. Like, you need to be 100% laser focused on, how do I fix these issues? Whether it's, talking to your customers, talking to your vendors, talking to a million banks, if it's, donating plasma, whatever it needs to be to try to fix that situation. But, I'm seeing it today. I'm talking to a lot of shop owners. I'm, looking for my next acquisition, and I'm looking at a lot of financials, and I'm seeing a lot of very similar stories that people are like, hey, I'm selling my business. And I'm like, you get a storm coming and they don't even know it, So it's like, there's a lot of people that are in this situation today that I don't even know if they even realize they're kind of walking down this path, staring at a cliff as well.
Yeah, no, that's really excellent advice. And, having been through a couple of pretty tight and one extremely tight situation with my shop back in the day after 9/11 happened, and we were weeks away from closing our doors. Yeah, I can tell you from firsthand, you're right. Nothing else matters if you cannot figure that part of it out. And thankfully we did, but just barely. Because when you're in a tough situation, that is not the time to go look for a line of credit or look for a new loan, because they do not want to give you any money if you're in distress.
Yeah, the best saying is, go get money when you don't need money.
Yeah,
that's the best
absolutely. Yeah. Well, my buddy Mike Payne, who runs the By the Numbers podcast we were talking about.
Yeah.
He mentioned just the other day, we were at a conference last week, and he's like, yeah, whenever, I've completely paid down the line of credit or whatever, and we're cruising, that's when I ask for a bump in it. Like, yeah, just, what happens, we'll see what we need in the future, but let's just go ask for another couple $100,000, right? And just, you do that over time, and as opposed to not doing that, and the difference that could make to your business if you have an extra few $100,000 of a line of credit could help you get through these low dips like you clearly faced.
Yeah, it could have been everything. Yeah, and I mean, ultimately what happened to us was, we were on our way. We kind of had a couple of, missteps, so I did all these things what I'm talking about. Had a plan. We had this going forward. Like, all right, here's the next 24 months. It's going to be bumpy. It's going to be rocky, but we got a plan out of it. Well, then, of course, circumstances happen, and you pivot as much as you can. But this is where, when you run too close to the knife's edge, you can't react. So for us, it was kind of three things that really done us in, and they're all three things that you probably have all lived every year of your lives, but when they hit the wrong time. So first was our biggest customer, had a big order cancellation. So they wanted to cancel 20% of their order book. So we had a $1 million revenue hit, from our biggest customer because, they had an order cancellation. That one, short term, kind of helped because we were able to get a cancellation fee, added some liquidity to the business. It gave us, some short term relief, but, it shortened the wall. It brought that cliff closer to the left.
Sure.
We worked through it, recast the budget. Even with that, we're like, okay, not great, but we could survive it. Next, our good friends at Boeing, helped us out with, the 777 getting pushed back again. So we had a large contract on the 777 gear, and it kept getting, their forecast kept getting pushed out and lowered to the right. So we were doing, a lot of gear work for Haru and Boeing, and so that. That was parts we already had made. They were on a shelf. That was our working capital was already sunk into that. So that was
of course,
another death now. So even with those two things, we're like, okay, things aren't going great. Like we could probably survive this. But the third was when our largest program, we got a mill order of raw material come in. We got it in, and shame on us. We 100% missed it, and we don't have anyone to blame but ourselves. But big tube material came in. We machine plated, shipped to customers in the field for months, and we realized that the raw material was the wrong spec grade or whatever.
Oh.
So when I say literally all your working capital is tied up into one product line, we had we had just gobs and gobs of material just sitting on the floor, now in quarantine. And for, it was about 6 months that was just all put on hold and couldn't, and it was a mill run. So it took us a year to get new materials. So we were at the mercy of, a large OEM, doing an engineering analysis, and this took too long, and the working capital in the business was depleted. And, so those three things, when you have those headwinds on top of a business that you really didn't have any flexibility to survive, that's kind of the death now. So,
man, God, that must have been a bad day when you realized the material spec was wrong.
It's a bad week.
Yeah. Bad week, bad month, bad year.
I spent so many hours looking through old specs trying to find a way to, was there a alternate? Was there an old parts list? Was there a spec that connected, some way to back into it? And nope, it ended up being wrong. And it was just.
So was that just a matter of whoever did the manufacturing planning and then placing or telling procurement what to buy just missed a number, or what? Yeah. How did that happen?
We did it all right on our end. So our PO was correct. Our flow downs were correct. We interpreted it correctly on our end. Literally the mill sent us the wrong material knowingly. Because it
knowingly?
Knowingly, yeah. So.
Oh, wow. Was there some legal action there?
So we tried, but when you don't have tons of liquidity, it's hard to,
sure.
Legal is expensive. Yeah. So we tried to work a commercial solution through them, and they're like, sure, send us all the material back, scrap it, and we'll figure something out. Well, our customer had the material. It was on planes, so we couldn't get it all back. So we were like, do we rip this all back, try to get a commercial solution from the mill, or do we go down the engineering path of getting a use as is or something where we can just turn the spigot back on? Yeah, so it's just it was at the end of the day, it's a scenario that happens in this industry. It's not great, but it does happen. It's just a matter of the scale and the timing. If it was any other product family, we've been fine. But this was literally, all of our revenue of Q4 of 2024 just about tied to it.
Wow. So was there material cert that came with the material? Was it falsified?
It was it was right. We just
didn't notice it.
The receiving guy didn't notice it, and actually we missed it on our FAI. Our customer missed it on their FAI. Their customer missed it on the FAI. It wasn't until our customer had like a new person doing the FAI for the first time when he was like, "Hey, this doesn't look right." So it was a calamity on a few levels, but end of the day, that was if that was the only thing that happened, like that happens to businesses. Like it's unfortunate. It sucks, but like that's the cost of doing business. It's just when you have 3 years of things stacking against you, your buffer's out of there. It's just it's the last domino to fall to tip you over. So
wow.
Hey, Larry, thanks for jumping on the phone with me real quick.
Hey, Mike, thanks for taking the time and giving me time of day. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, so, you've been to Hill and like we're going through a lot of changes with some new machines and working on our automation, our work holding and so forth. And I've got, we've been sitting here talking about some plans to automate some machines, bring in some new machines, some new automated machines and so forth. what should I tell my guys, like what we need to be looking at for work holding as we, that works for us now, but also in the future as we integrate automation?
It's kind of objective, Mike, and I'll tell you what the difference is. Just make sure whatever you buy has flexibility and is adaptable across multiple platforms. The biggest mistake most customers make is buying something for a specific job, and then 6 weeks later, they have to do another job and they have to buy something else. We always tell people buy for now and buy for years down the road, because any one job may change, flex, change in capacity, quantities, whatever the case may be. Just make sure that your work holding doesn't obsolete itself, that it's flexible enough to expand.
Yeah, that's such a great point too. I guess a lot of it would depend on, so like in our case, we're kind of high mix, low volume versus, if you're a production shop doing the same thing all the time, I guess you'd take a totally different approach, huh?
It used to be that way. You used to look at people that made thousands of parts, and there's still companies that do that, but they're realizing that building dedicated fixtures is a great idea when you have a captive part that's not changing, that goes on for years at a time or weeks at a time, depending on your production levels. But with the new type of work holding that's out there, and now there's so much monitoring built in, and the ability to know where you were the last time you did a job, and especially like we talked about, Mike and Hill, and your high mix, low volume. We're the same way in our own facility here. We might make one or two or anything. If we make three or four, it's production for us. So for us and for companies like Hill, which is the largest part of our market, you just have to make sure that what you're buying is suitable for your customer base, because everybody's customer base changes, just these little tweaks and bits that make a huge difference when you buy work holding. Small things are big differences.
That makes perfect sense. One of the things I've liked with Larry, some of the options you guys have too is, and when you were in my shop, we talked about it, like I've got all these Kurt Weisses that we've had for years, and you have solutions to help me there too.
Yeah. I say, why throw out something you paid money for? We make,
right.
We make interfaces for a lot of our competitors' products. You'll notice that if you look at like what everybody refers to as stationary work holding, some people call it 5-axis tooling, some people use 3-axis tooling. It's all stationary work holding. You look at the systems that are out there now. When I started in this business, Kurt Weiss was new technology. A 6-inch Kurt Weiss was $300. Try finding a $300 Kurt Weiss now. But it was the technology that was available at the time. Now we make jaws that utilize our technology that allow you to now, instead of having to prep a part or have a part prepared for a specific operation, I can clamp on a 3.5 millimeter ledge and give as much grip force as I can get ripping apart full contact. And people always call you out on it. And the test I always tell them that we've done for customers, I had a customer that said, there's no way this will work. You're going to have to show me. We took a piece of material that was 6 inches thick, 24 inches wide, and 30 inches high, and machined at the top, taking 210,000 steps of cut. And the guy just smiled. He goes, I can't wait to take this out of that place. Me neither. Stop machining, put a lot of ice. The guy goes, there's no way. What did you do? I go, well, I don't have a magic wand, and I don't wear a cape like Harry Potter. I said, what we did is show you what we talk about is true. That's the other thing I tell people, Mike. It's easy as a salesman to tell people how great my product is or why we're the best. What I tell people is, buy what's best for you. I give our competitor's name out as often as I recommend my product. I know what my wheelhouse is. I think any good salesperson looks down the road. One sale to me is one sale. I want to sell to you 100 times. If I'm willing to open my book up and say, hey, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at this, let me help you find a better solution. Mike, you and I had a situation where we're talking about vices. You chose a competitor. It was the most flexible one for you. No problem. Not that I can't interface with that competitor. And that's the thing now. We've all built kind of state-of-the-art platforms that allow us to have flexibility and use other products within a single system.
Yeah, well, we've certainly appreciated your guidance and honesty as we've gone through some of the work holding decisions we've made so far, and we've got a lot to make. So I'm going to share all this information with the team, and I'm sure you'll see some stuff coming in.
I appreciate it, but anything we can do to help, Mike, to me, it's about the industry. I grew up in this, paid for my kids going to college. It's making it so I can retire in 4 years. My favorite thing to say is I want to live long enough to be a pest to my children. I think I'm already accomplishing that long before I'm retired. So I'm living my own.
I can't imagine that to be a true statement.
I'm living my. Oh God, you know what, Mike? It's funny, as you know. Children are children. They're always your kids, and it's funny because my kids had no clue what I did until I had a daughter that worked here for an internship in the summer. She goes, Dad, I thought some guy named Chuck was calling you and you were going out on Friday nights. There was nothing to do with product. Because I found out there really is something called a Chuck in the metal. She goes,
that's too funny.
Mom was so impressed that you're not out drinking with your friends every night. And it's, as you know, Mike, it's all about the relationships you build in this industry. And I feel like in order to maintain and build a relationship, you have to be honest. It's the cornerstone of anything. If you can't be honest with the people that you're doing business with, take a look in the mirror, be introspective, figure out what you really should be doing, because you shouldn't be talking to people or selling to them. Because I want somebody to tell me the cold hard truth, and instead of blowing me some line of a sales pitch, I would rather have somebody tell me, you know what, you're a great guy, I appreciate your help, but I'm not buying your product. And I'm thank them, shake their head, and walk away happily.
Well, that's a great way to put it. I'm going to share this info with the team, and we'll get moving.
Excellent, Mike. Anything we could do to help, let us know, bro.
And was that just like, because I know those material specs, it's like, whatever, it's 7075 T6511. Like, there's many digits after that T number. Was it just like one of those? It was like T51 instead of, or T651 instead of 11. Was it like some just tiny little digit like that? I mean, clearly it was probably the same alloy. Like, it's not like they shipped you 6061 or something.
Yeah. So it was tube material, and it was for starter generators. So big housings that we were making. And material was the same kind of grade, but it was just like a little bit, had like some more carbon in it or less carbon in it. So from a structure standpoint, absolutely no difference at all. The challenge is because these components are like magnetized to create electricity, the content of the metal actually matters. Like if you have too much carbon, it's not as magnetic, then it may have failures in the field. So it wasn't a structure issue. It was an actual, like, the alloy composition mattered.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
And to complicate matters, our customer had like a catalog of these. So like they would have like a generator that would go with a generator control unit. And there was like 1,200 combinations. So you can have like this generator control unit with this. So they wanted to do all these like variable tests. And it's like, it was like, there was just no, like, it was just one of those, it was like the worst case scenario. The product, what it was, the issue we had. It was just you couldn't write a worse like scenario to happen, and timing.
Gosh, and to have it missed. I remember a part we made once where we were given a drawing, no 3D model, and there was a tiny little slot on one edge of this cylinder. It was only on one side, not the other side. And the only way to know the difference was like whether the line on the drawing was like a faint line or a solid line, and we made it with the slot in the wrong wall. And just like it made it through 2 or 3 inspectors, made it through final, made it through our customers receiving inspection. And like only when they went to like install it into something did they be like, hey, the slot's in the wrong spot,
Yep.
And so when you try to dissect those, it blows your mind how many eyeballs miss something, like 5 or 6 levels of people looking at it and they all missed it. But yeah, it happens. Like it just really does. And, I guess the lesson there is be really, really thorough with your receiving inspection and make sure that you're not just rubber stamping, something, and put that check in place.
Yeah, just in general, like the devil in the details in this industry. One small number, one small dash, just it's everything. And depending on what it is, when it happens to your business, it could be everything. So
yeah, this is exactly why I say it's the hardest business in the world, right? All these million, I say it all the time, like these thousands of details that have to be right. That includes that temper, that material spec that wasn't right, and it caused this cascade of effects that for many other businesses, probably not a huge deal if you're installing copper tubing in someone's house, and the material was slightly different than the last run of material, but it's just the plumbing in your house. It doesn't matter that much, but on an airplane, it does. And
for sure,
you can't weather that storm. Wow, that's fascinating. Let's talk about the capitalization part.
Yeah.
What could you have done differently? Would you have gotten, when you're first negotiating the business, gotten a bigger line of credit, or had just more fun? I don't know where your funding came from originally, but maybe just talk about some of the options you could have had you realized you would have needed it.
Yeah, I think two kind of aspects there. I think we bought the business on equity, so we raised the cash for it. The easiest solution there would have been like we should have shifted a little bit of the purchase price down and put it on the balance sheet as working capital. That was the right answer. That's the simplest. Or on our line of credit, we had a decent sized line, but yeah, we just didn't have enough capitalization in the business for changing over the customer base, growing, and really just this comes back to like we truly didn't understand, with the landing gear, growth, all that cycle, because it was the business was changing. We changed it so even if the numbers were good, we improved it. We grew the top line. We did more aerospace, got rid of the non-aerospace work. So even with that, even if the numbers were better, we still didn't have a true appreciation for the capital that it took to run that business. And part of it is when you're not performing, your working capital needs to go up. If you're not shipping enough, if your pricing is undervalued, it's all those little levers that kind of chip into it. So like, if you don't have a good cost structure, if you don't know the business is profitable, like, being well capitalized is the only way to keep yourself time and flexibility to really, get through the other side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. If you listen to like Jamie Dimon talk or some of these, big CEOs, they call it a fortress balance sheet. During 2008, JP Morgan wasn't worried because they had tons of cash on hand and they had plenty of, capitalization to ride through it. So, but being more conservative, understanding where your pain points are, and we mentioned earlier, raising debt when you don't need it. It's a lot harder to convince someone to give you money when you've got, losses. You're running on fumes. You're trying to sell a story of upside versus like, yeah, give us 1.5 versus 1 million of line of credit. Who cares? We're not going to use it anyway. But to your point, if we would have had $200K extra of line of credit at any point during this, that's pretty huge, lever to pull, especially when you don't have it.
Yeah. Having seen it many times myself and lived it as well, even when everything is going fine, or you aren't changing customers that now have longer payment terms, just growing revenue growth by itself is just expensive, right?
Yes.
Even if everything's lining up nicely, just growing causes that cash deficit just because growth does that.
Your first job, you don't make any money on it usually, right? Time you figure it out, it takes second and third runs before you start, downing your cards. So if you're, all new jobs, all new customers, you're not super profitable in the best case scenarios, in that scenario when you're growing. So when that's majority of your business combined with some of these headwinds, combined with your legacy business being, underpriced. One of the things, looking back to as well, and I think we went after a 25% increase with our customers, and which is pretty healthy of an increase to take on. But at the end of the day, it wasn't truly the right number. We just took 25% because we thought that was what we could get. That would give us a lifeline. The losses were actually a lot heavier than that.
Wow.
So one thing I would have done differently is I wouldn't have just picked an arbitrary, 25%. I would have been a lot more, ruthless about getting the actual price increase we needed. If we lost the work or the customer, then we lost the work of the customer. But then, it would have been a different financial position. So I was trying to thread that line of keep the customer, keep the work, get it to a position where it still makes sense, keeps the business alive, and then we'll backfill it with new, other, more attractive work. And that was happening. It just didn't go fast enough.
Sure.
And then and you run into those headwinds we talked about, and you got a kind of a perfect storm of like, this isn't going to work.
Yeah. So to come back to that due diligence part again, in an example like that, would it be possible? I mean, would a seller even be willing to let you say, all right, let's take this program as just an example. Show me what you get paid for it. Show me what you spend out of pocket for the labor, materials, processes, and like dig into to even, possibly reveal that these parts are so far upside down. Like, is that realistic to do that level of due diligence on a big program, maybe?
Well, I think so, or at least do a sample shot, where you pick 5 or 10 parts. The challenge is, I think we try to do that, and you ran a shop before. Job costing is not the easiest thing on the planet. So if you're not as sophisticated, or if you didn't have a functioning ERP, or the other things, that data is there, but it's not really there. Right. If that makes sense. So I think we just made too many assumptions, made too many decisions blind. In this case, I was a customer for a lot of years, so I knew the business intimately from that perspective, but not from a financial perspective. So I think a lot of those things we were comfortable with because we've seen the product, we've seen the performance, we've seen these other things, and like, okay, we'll figure out these costing things. They've been out for 40 years. They're making money. They're making really complex parts. Like the warning signs weren't necessarily there until you got in the business. Yeah, the numbers were messy. Yeah, they didn't tell the whole story. Yeah, it was tough to get data from them, but that's not a unique tale in a sub $10 million machine shop.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I mean, even if you did do that couple of sample part numbers and dig into it, they might show that, this program took 100 hours of labor when in fact it took 250, but no one tracked their time well enough, right? So you just have no idea.
Clocked in, or they're using a bad rate. They're saying it's $80 shop rate, but it's really $160. So you would have been 2x underreported. So I mean, there's so much. That's what I'm saying. Like these valuing these businesses and doing your diligence, it's really, really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Especially at these smaller businesses, because like you're not getting GAAP audited financials. You're getting a lot of times these owners are trying to minimize their tax liabilities. They have CPAs who are trying to not show a profit so they don't have to pay taxes. Even when they are doing it the correct way. And the day most of these guys are machinists. They're not accountants. They're not business. They want to make aerospace parts, and the books are kind of an afterthought.
Yeah. So was that business actually running at a loss for a bunch of time prior to you buying it? And how did they just have enough cash to float all those losses, or?
Well, very liquid, and then heavy in the military during COVID, which everyone was pulling on. So they had, which that was their decently profitable work was that scope of work. So very liquid, and for a couple of years they had a perfect storm of like the right program. They couldn't make enough of the parts, so they had a couple of tailwinds behind that made the business look a lot more attractive than it was. Flash forward post acquisition, that big customer was on an exit plan. They went from a $3 million work scope to less than $500,000. Within 12 months. Based on the contract winding down.
Okay, so it wasn't even a performance thing; it was just the end of the contract.
Oh, it was both. It was end of the contract, and the performance from the previous regime to that point had been pretty lackluster. So they knew they weren't renewing the contract. We obviously found out the hard way.
Yeah, that's one of those things that the fresh coat of paint, because they don't have to tell you that contract's winding down unless you ask them, right?
We knew we had a year left, so we knew it was coming to an end. But we were pretty confident that the scope of work, our performance was good enough where maybe it wasn't a $3 million, but it was we'd keep 60% of the program, and maybe reprice a few parts, and we want to diversify anyway. It was too large of a customer, so we were okay with that risk. But going from all to nothing, and then the work we did backfill it with went from a really good payer to pretty crummy payers. To it exposed that gap, even more so. That wound got even more ripped open.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, let's turn and talk for a minute about you reselling the shop. What happened there? I know you had reached out to me, months ago, and I shared on LinkedIn that there was a shop for sale and had a bunch of interest. Whatever happened to it? Yeah, let's talk about that part.
Yeah, so early 2025, we made a tough decision that we needed to sell the business. And there's two ways to sell a business. Someone comes in, buys your business, clears your debt, they own it. Or in our case, we had too much leverage on the business where, the valuation wasn't going to clear our debt. So we went out, thanks to Paul and some networking, we did find some interested suitors who would buy the business through a Chapter 11 restructuring. So, we did sell the business to a holding company, doing some off-wing military work in Cleveland, who were looking to diversify into some on-wing components. They were pretty sophisticated of buying a business through a restructuring process. They've done it before, and were pretty constructive through the process. So, yeah, we ran a process, took bids, talked to a lot of people about, who want to buy the asset. But yeah, we did go through a formal Chapter 11 restructuring sale of the business that closed, mid-March. So they've been running it now about 5 months. So they're well on their way. I'm sure they're probably seeing some of the same challenges that we had and are combating those. But the biggest difference is they're a very financially solvent, healthy, large business. So, they can come in and, kind of fix the problems, put some money in the balance sheet to capitalize the business in the way it needs to be, and really get it to the point where, it kind of gets back to its roots where it does make pretty complex components. And just really, I think, gives the balance sheet capitalization problem that, once they get fixed, that they'll be, in a pretty good spot moving forward. So, a good team there, really good engineering, good machine assets, really a solid performing business that, just needed to have an owner who was in a better position to capitalize it. And just, we were pretty small. It wasn't, we had already sunk, an extra $1 million into the business, post acquisition, once we realized some of these challenges. And our board, was not willing to go any deeper into their pockets. They,
sure,
and probably rightfully so. It was, it's probably going to take a lot more than just another $1 million to get there. And there's better ways to probably allocate that capital for them today than that. So, and they made a pretty tough decision to, if we got a seller and it was a good steward and it was an ongoing interest, to keep 40 people employed, then that was what we were going to do. And we're lucky we do that. We found someone to buy the business. People kept their jobs. The business is still around. And
I was going to ask that part. Most of the employees got to stick through it and continue employment.
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but majority of the employees were there. Anytime there's strife like this, there's some
turnover. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I'm sure some have left or they've made a few separation choices on their end as well. But yeah, for the most part, I would say the majority of the employees got to stay and are still there and hopefully doing well.
Yeah, you were talking about, was it Charlie Munger talking about it wasn't that. It was the fortress balance sheet, right? There was really healthy balance sheet that can weather these challenges. And that was the difference. Obviously, with this new buyer, they could do that. It wasn't adding that much additional capital was not a huge deal for them. And I, just looking at the very macro, sense of this right now in the economy and where we are in time, it's a good time to own that type of a business, right? Like there are a lot of airplanes to make for the next many decades. There's a lot of military spending. The demand for those parts is not the problem, right? There's going to be, so if you have a business that, has decent machines and people and processes and you can actually, and that's priced right. Yeah, it can be a very good long-term healthy business, but the cash flow has to work out as well. And, it's not like there was a macro trend where the landing gear market is just going down and down and down. And, that's the opposite, right? It's a very healthy, strong market. So
no, it was not from lack of opportunities or need for our services at all. If anything, it was the opposite. We had too many inquiries, too much out there. It was just, right. And I'm with you, Paul. I think this is I think it's a fantastic time to be in aerospace manufacturing today. A couple things are happening. One is our friends at Boeing, I think, are finally figuring out what's going on again. They're making airplanes. They're hitting their rates. They're saying the right things, doing the right things. Seems like they're on the upswing, which is good for everyone.
Yes.
And two, I think there's been a prevailing shift in industry as well, where I think kind of tied to that first point with Boeing is, I think these big, large OEMs have realized we can't keep squeezing every nickel, every term, every out of these small manufacturers.
Yeah,
I'm starting to see the leverage now is sliding down the food chain to where the IP, the manufacturing knowledge, the guy that can make those weird widgets are becoming much, much more increasingly valuable, and they're willing to pay for it now because at the end of the day they realize, if they go out of business, or if they're not solvent to make the part, or if they can't get it on time, or if it's not right, it doesn't really matter like what it costs, because you can't build a $100 million airplane then. Yeah. So I think the new kind of philosophy is the supply chain's getting healthier, which means they're paying more for parts. They're being friendly on terms. So I think you're starting to see there's a kind of where the automotive industry went years ago, is there's bringing a partnership now where it's a true partnership, whereas before it was where Boeing, we want to get on a 737, you want to go on F-35, and you'll do it for almost cost because it's legacy platform, it's sustained work. And, I think those days are gone now where there's enough work out there where you don't have to chase every dollar. You take what makes sense for you, command the right margin, and you can start making good business decisions. And one thing I've learned is like, if you're not making money, like just go tell your customer, like be very transparent. Be open kimono with them, walk them through the numbers, say, here's where we're at. This is where we need to be. And either they're going to say, yeah, we're going to pay that, or they're not. But either way, you're going to come out better on the other side because you're not losing money, or you're going to get what the market demands, and everyone wins.
Yeah. Yeah. You're touching on so many things that I've talked about on other shows with other people. In episode 11 of this show, Machine Shop Mastery, I had Ken Frankel on, who owns an aerospace, machine shop here in Washington. And he just talked about how brutal the payment terms are, right? And how these big OEMs are just using these small vendors as their bank account, right? They're just, if what was the term? Partnering for success, right? The initiative, which means, we're going from net 90 to net 120 or net 180. You're partnering in their success, not your own shop success. So, but I'm glad to hear that is shifting because it is just unfair and too onerous on these small businesses to be able to float, many, many months worth of cost before they get paid themselves. Hopefully that trend continues, and the greater theme is truly partnering for the long-term success of the supply chain, big and small companies alike, because that's what it takes. It takes all of them.
Yeah. And kind of last thing I'd like kind of lead with is, if you're looking to sell your business, I've been talking to a lot of founders and business owners, and, I get pretty consistent themes that I've come across. So if you're listening to this, you're like, I'm going to be selling my business the next year or two. Here's the things you start thinking about. One is, there's really two ways to buy a business, right? It's either you're going to buy the machines at the asset value, or you're going to buy off cash flow, right? So prove your cash flow, you have to have good, clean books. So if you don't have good, clean books today, hire a CPA, go fractional CFO. There's firms out there that do this, but get your books audited, get them cleaned up, and really live and breathe by that the next 2 years as you go to sell your business. Because, when buyers come in, they're, I think with the debt, the inflation, the other challenges of the M&A market today, if you don't have good numbers and can prove what you're doing, I think you're going to have a challenge selling your business. And two, the biggest one I see is they just don't have a management staff. So the value of your business is the day after you sell it, what's left. If you're doing 80% of the quoting, customer, all those things, and you're leaving the business the day after it sells, you're not really buying a business then. You're kind of, so like get a management staff, get your financials cleaned up, diversify your customer base. You don't want to have 50% sitting at the top of your order book. Those are red flags to guys like me when I'm looking to buy a business. Now, I've lived it, I've breathed it, I kind of have it honed in. Those three things, heavy customer concentration, your financials being a mess, and then not having a solid management staff to kind of transition the business. Those are the three kind of things I would say are the biggest like red flags to anyone looking to buy a business, especially in this industry.
Yeah. You're speaking the gospel there. We've, again, on other shows, we've talked about, getting, spending a few tens of thousands for a CPA to come in and clean everything up. That could add hundreds of thousands to the value of your business, right? So it's a really good investment to do that. Making sure your financials are clean, giving the future buyers the confidence that this is a solid business. It's just going to increase that multiple of what they're willing to pay. And yes, a management team got to be in place, running good systems, good processes. If you can step away for 2 weeks on short notice to take a last minute, cruise that you got a great deal on and your business can run without you, that is a good sign that you have what you need in place to, not rely on the owner to make all the decisions or know what's going on or, be the point of contact for every customer. So
invest in a good ERP like ProShop, so you have a good tool
thank
at
you.
your disposal.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't disagree. But yeah, these are all just super important things. And you do all those, and that multiple might go from, a 2.5 or 3 to a 4 or 5 or 6, right? So yeah, it can make such a difference. And it doesn't take that many years to correct those things. So, you're right. If you're a couple of years out for selling, just make it your initiative to fix these fundamental things, and it will be worth your time.
And I would get a independent valuation for business done too as well. Mm-hmm. One of the toughest conversations I have pretty consistently is, machine shop owner A thinks it's worth this. Mark in the market thinks it's worth this, and there's this pretty wide chasm that it's hard to close that emotional gap to. So, if you're selling your business, everyone wants to maximize their return, their equity. I get it. But the beauty of this industry and this market is, it's a pretty tried and true method of how these businesses get evaluated. So it's a formula, just go out there. It's everywhere. But, get that done, educate yourself. That way, when you do go to sell it, you're living in more realistic expectations than like, I think this thing's worth $10 million. And everyone else is like, this thing's like $3 million. And, it makes it very tough to get a deal done then, because you want to hang on to fix these things and maximize your return.
Sure.
These guys are moving on to a different asset that maybe isn't the right one. It's just, so I have that conversation a lot, and it's tough being the first guy in, because then I'm the first one telling them that, like, hey, your business isn't worth that. And that pretty much puts me out of the running then.
Absolutely. But we've heard the stories over and over again of an owner that thinks their business is worth a certain amount, probably just because that's the number they have in their head that they want to retire with. And they're oblivious to the fact that it's not actually worth that much. And they will stick to that for years until they actually just have to close the business and sell off the assets, because they just cannot face reality that their business isn't actually worth what the market is willing to pay.
The one I see the most is they'll be like, well, I spent $10 million the last 10 years in machine tools. I should get $10 million.
That's irrelevant.
Like, that's not how accounting works and depreciation and cash flow. But thank you. Like, those are good assets. That's why I want to buy your business. But
sure,
that's not not how this works. So which I love founders. I love having those conversations. But it's pretty interesting having those conversations when they're like, well, this machine itself is worth $2 million. I'm like, well, go sell it for $2 million then. Someone buy
it. Yeah. So as we close out here, you talked about, like the seller's emotional state of mind for selling. Tell me a little bit about your emotional state of mind with buying. Like, did you get attached emotionally to this business and are like, oh man, the potential is great, and maybe you like put some blinders on for some of the problems, and it sounds like you did as much due diligence as you realistically thought was needed at the time, but I know, having bought expensive things like a house or who knows what, like you kind of get emotionally invested and kind of fall in love with the thing and ignore some of the red flags. And I think you really just need to throw that all out and just be very laser focused on the numbers and, be a very objective rather than subjective in these decision making.
Yeah, it's a great point. 100%. That definitely happened. To what extent, it's hard to quantify that. And I think anyone who's looking to buy a business, run a shop, you're kind of made up a little bit differently than most people. You're like, yeah, so I'll fix that. I'll figure that out. You kind of have this mentality of like, yeah, that's not great, but that's why I'm buying this, because that's what my value add is.
Mm-hmm.
So the only I've done, on this, I would say this next round is I've developed a really nice, I would say, network of, sponsors, investors, peers that, when I come across these opportunities and I work them up, I run it past them and say, hey, what am I missing here? And, they all kind of have their niche where I know some of them are more conservative, some are, don't like distressed businesses. So I kind of know their flavor, but it's good to get some well-rounded, input from people who aren't emotionally tied to it to kind of keep you honest. You're like, hey, this looks really great. Like, what am I missing here? Well, it's like, well, did you see this? It's like, oh, no, I didn't. So, really getting that second opinion, developing a trusted advisors, and just really for anyone who's running a business today, it's lonely at the top. Like you need to have a mentor, a support group. Like there's no one that can really like understand what you're going through. Like if you're sitting there on Wednesday night and you're not sure if you're making payroll on Thursday, who the heck can you talk to about that? Your wife? No, you don't want to scare the Jesus out of her. Can't talk to your employees. So it really is just like finding that network, those resources where when you have these big life decisions, these opportunities where you can get some professional, unbiased feedback to help keep you centered, because they're big decisions and they're nuanced decisions and they're not black and white. Every business is different. It's such a nuanced take that the more information you get, the more perspective you can get, and try to keep your emotions out of as much as possible. The one thing I've learned to do is like, okay, play the worst three things that can happen. If those three things happen, what does the business look like? And try to understand that, because that's a possibility. Like those things may happen. Like it's to your point, it's a tough industry. It's the hardest job on the planet. It's not unforeseen that bad things happen, in manufacturing. That's the norm, so really go through that. If these three things happen, what would I do? What could the business survive it? Get that network, get that diligence done from people you trust. And end of the day, numbers make sense, but you gotta make a gut call. And I'd say buying a business from a good seller helps as well. If they're a trustworthy person, they're not someone who's going to, be difficult to work with, deal with. Because at the end of the day, like whether they're your landlord, whether you have, a note with them, whether there's a 12-month indemnities period, like you're tied to them for a period of time. Like you need to deal with people who are trustworthy, honest, above board. And if you start to have any reservations about it, it's just walk away. There's a ton of businesses out there. There's a lot of things that you can buy. You don't need to put yourself in a position where you're personally guaranteeing your house or these things for an opportunity that's not going to be there, or not going to work out for the best. So, but no, I love this industry. There's nothing else like it. There is no other organic high than, running a machine shop and seeing it go well. And it's also, it could get pretty dark, when things aren't going well and, there's no one to talk to. So, keeping your mental health, keeping your perspective, keeping your network and your circle, strong is important, because whether you've done it for 20 years or you're looking to get into it or you're looking to get out of it, there's going to be some bumps and challenges ahead. And it's not easy. It's not for everyone. So,
yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much for this time. This was an incredibly valuable conversation, and I know there'll be many, many people that are so glad we did this and may even want to reach out and say thank you. So would LinkedIn be the place to direct them?
Yeah, LinkedIn, or if they reach out to you directly, Paul, if it's somebody in your network,
I can connect you.
Connect me with them, and we'll go from there. Sure. I'm always looking to have conversations, even if you're not interested in selling, buying. If you just want to run something by me, or vent, or get a take on something. I love this industry. I love talking about it. So feel free to look me up, and love to meet you, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you for that. That's a wonderful paying it forward. Well, thank you again, Mark. Good luck on your search for the next one. Hope it turns out awesome. Maybe you'll be back again for the third time guest. I'd love to share another big success in a few years with a new shop that you bought.
I have goals now. I gotta be the first 3-timer.
First 3-timer. That would be amazing. All right, my friend. Well, thank you so much. Great to spend this time. And thanks again for all the wisdom.
No problem. Anytime, Paul.